Hello, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to Satsang. Satsang is an ancient spiritual practice from India. It means being in reality together. I give Satsang live every Wednesday and Sunday night in Portland, Maine. This Dharma talk was recorded during one of our Wednesday night gatherings. Please visit jayakula.org to learn more about the teachings. You can find video satsangs on Jayakula's YouTube channel, and my books are all available on Amazon.com. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. So next week, we're going to have a series of teachings that are really kind of getting back to what first thrilled me about the Trika Shaivite tradition in particular. I had been practicing loosely some form of Kriya Yoga and mantra since I was in my 20s without knowing what tradition those practices came from. And then at some point, much later, I figured out where it all came from. And as some of you know, the very first book that I ever read about Trika Shaivism, Kashmir Shaivism, was this book called Vach. Something like the nature of the word in Kashmir Shaivism. It was like 300 pages of this incredibly dense exposition of language and grammar and its relationship to cosmology and all that. So I literally understood 10% of it. Literally. That's not an exaggeration. I didn't know any Sanskrit at the time, except maybe Namaste, but I might not have even known that. And of course, the book was just full of lots of Sanskrit. And still, even that 10%, as I've told you many times, I was just electrified. You know, it's like every hair stood up on end. And after that, after plowing through Vach, you know, I read a whole bunch of books. I went on this like 10-year odyssey of reading about the tradition. But every time I would get to a section of something, especially, you know, Abhinavagupta, the founder of the tradition, loved to write about all of this, like every individual letter of the Sanskrit alphabet and all of its esoteric meanings and its place in the cascade of creation. And he just loved this grammar / cosmology stuff. And so even though I was interested in it, I really couldn't grasp it. And I would just sort of skip over those parts of every book that I read. You know, if I turned the page and I saw a bunch of letters, I'd be like, meh. So now many, many years have gone by. And now I've been practicing for 33 years, which is nothing. 33 years in one little lifetime. And so I decided to do this teaching next week on the goddess and the word. Because Shakti, or Paravach, the supreme word, goddess, is the whole of creation. The relationship between the word, between speaking and listening, and the creation is they're one and the same. So now I'm kind of having a somewhat similar experience because I'm going back and I'm kind of looking at those texts that I haven't looked at in so long. After a while, you know, I spent 10 years reading, and then my practice just took over everything. I really stopped reading all that stuff entirely. And so now I'm kind of going back for the first time and rereading some of these original texts that I read, the Tantras and writings by Abhinavagupta and Shamaraja and all these people. And literally, I'm having such a reaction to it that I'll read like 3 sentences and I have to stop because it's just so intense. You know, because now I kind of get it all. I've gotten it sort of through my practice, and now I'm reading it, and it's like... Yeah, so it's just like this incredible download. Thought it might be good since next week we'll have a lot of people visiting from the West Coast and elsewhere. And we're going to have teachings every day. And I don't know if you guys are going to be around, but we're having our first tantric ball on the 17th, Saturday night, the 17th. And that's what it's going to be like. I don't know what's going to happen for you guys, but I'm going to totally geek out on this language and cosmology thing. And what I'm hoping is that, because I literally, I can't describe to you what's happening, but I'm reading these sentences and it's almost like a transmission overload. I have to just keep stopping. And I'm getting plenty of sleep and nothing really is going on, but I notice I'm getting like big circles under my eyes and something is just being shaken up in there. So I'm hoping that even though it's really geeky, tantric geekiness, and much more into the view in a way that we haven't talked about view before. Because my whole thing has always been try to bring people into the tradition using ordinary everyday language. Since the very beginning. I spent 10 years reading all of these esoteric books and academic books and commentaries. And my understanding of the tradition that came from those books sort of came from all of them. There was never any single book that explained the whole thing in language and in a way that a non-academic or non-geek could understand. And I really felt the lack of that. People would always be asking me, and they still do, what can I read to get started understanding this tradition? And there was nothing. Like, unless you read 15 books, you couldn't really get the whole picture. So that's why I wrote the first book, Pilgrims to Openness, trying to give people some understanding in a language that wasn't overwhelming or threatening or anything. But now I feel like I'm kind of coming full circle. And now you're going to get the overwhelming, threatening bit next week. But I feel like now you're going to get it in this way that I'm hoping I can convey to you the incredible beauty of this tradition and the relationship of the practitioners of this tradition to primordial reality. I mean, I'm just having my mind blown every minute this past week. So now that I'm getting it myself from having practiced all this time, I'm hoping I'm able to convey some of that to you all, in a direct way, not just through the content of the teachings. You know what I mean? So maybe it's good tonight, also because we have some visitors from Oakland, my old stomping grounds, to go back and think about what are the fundamentals of the view, so that as we're going forward into next week, we can have that firmly in mind. Because what happens is, even though you've had a lot of view teachings, we have also a lot of things we're bringing into the rooms and into our lives that are not the view. And it's sometimes hard, as Santosha has discovered in our little repartee on Facebook Live the other night, that it's very hard. Even when you've heard the view a zillion times, it's very hard to hold on to it in the face of your habitual ways of thinking and feeling. Somehow your fears about things or ideas about things slip in there, even though you've heard the view a million times, right? It just happens. That's what habit pattern is about. So the most absolutely fundamental view of this tradition, and the view is based on experience, direct experience. It's not anything that was thought up as a philosophy. That's why we call it view instead of philosophy. View, the word in Sanskrit is darshan. And darshan means to see directly. It doesn't mean to theorize or philosophize about anything. It means to see and also to be seen directly. And of course, when we're in teachings, that's what we're doing. we're seeing and we're being seen. And then hopefully that becomes our whole experience at some point. That's why we say view, and I really avoid the word philosophy like the plague, because it gives a very wrong idea of what view is. The most fundamental view, the most fundamental thing that you realize, that you see directly from doing the practices of this tradition, is that you are living in an alive, self-aware reality, a reality of unbroken awareness, where there is nothing other than that awareness and its energy, its self-reflective, creative energy we call Shakti. And that you are an aspect of that reality. Your experience is an aspect of that reality. You are not separate from it. You are made out of that awareness and energy. You are continuous with it. And your lives are not contained in bodies. Your lives are infinite events of different kinds of experiences that are being created and enjoyed by that alive, self-aware reality. So that is the most fundamental thing that we recognize when we do this sadhana. And when we say recognize living presence, or be in living presence, or be in a state of immersion in living presence, or integrate your awareness with living presence, we mean that self-aware creative livingness that is pervasive and unbroken, and of which everything is entirely full. And we also mean that you, having as your own nature that alive, self-aware, creative reality, you having that as your own nature, have an innate tendency to discover that. Built into you is a tendency toward wanting to discover who you are. Why do you think human beings all over the planet are running around wondering who they are? I mean, isn't that kind of freaky? We all have these questions about ourselves, right? Even people who are content or, not seeking particularly any spiritual thing or not particularly aware, almost everybody, unless they're in a state of deep, deep ignorance, almost everybody, and I mean ignorance, not lack of education, insensibleness. Almost everybody has questions about who am I, what's happening here, what's my place, those kinds of questions. That is an expression of the tendency of everything that's being created to seek to know itself and know its primordial essence nature, awareness and energy, or living presence is what I call it, creative self-awareness. So that is really built into you. And there's myriad ways of asking those questions and seeking those answers. This is one of them, what we're doing here. So another part of the fundamental view of this tradition is that absolutely no one is cut off from being able to discover their real nature. And that's very important. That every single sentient being has the capacity to do that. I mean, we don't know how quickly, but every single sentient being has that capacity. And the other fundamental view that's important is that because everything is having this tendency toward discovering its own real nature, and because everything is made of living awareness, wisdom, that we can use any aspect of our lives to help us to discover who we are. We don't need to go somewhere and discover some really complicated tools of some esoteric nature. We were talking last night about an ancient practice that's recommended in the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, just gazing at a flower. Something so simple as that can give you a direct, immediate, incontrovertible experience of non-conceptual awareness, of a less conditioned form of awareness. And if you look at all the texts of the tradition, of course, they're complicated sadhanas. In addition, we do some of those complicated practices, but they're also extremely simple ways. And what else do we know about those complicated practices? Why do we have those? Because some people like them. Because we have a great capacity to be distracted. And when we are heavily exercising our great capacity to be distracted, we need very complicated distractions to distract us from our distractions. The less distracted you are, the more immersed in living presence you are, the more able you are to find your way to that, the less complicated practices you need. The closer you are to realization, you're the one gazing at the flower. You're not the one doing tattva shuddhi. Tattva shuddhi is a very complicated practice. But if you are really distracted by your body, by your mind, by your emotions, various karmas and tensions, then you need to engage all of those things, doing a lot of stuff so that you start to recalibrate and move in a different direction. The view teaches us that we can use everything that is in our lives, our ordinary everyday lives, and that as we progress in relaxing and becoming more uncontrived and natural and spontaneous, the types of practices we need to do become simpler and simpler. And the tradition also teaches us, and this is important, that there's no need for religion. So religion in the sense of believing in something or having faith in something. This is a very important point. We should conceive of ourselves much more like explorers or discoverers or even scientists who are given tools to directly relate ourselves to primordial wisdom nature. And we are just going to discover that for ourselves. We have the teacher. The teacher's kind of an appliance too, like a transmission appliance. And we have our practices, and we have our community as practice, and we're using all those things, and it's our job to do a good job of listening, applying, and discovering. And what we are aiming towards is having real confidence in reality, real confidence in the life process, real confidence in our knowledge. We're looking for knowledge, not faith or belief. So that's a very important distinction that we have here, and it really informs the entire tradition. You never hear any of the founders of this tradition talking about belief or faith. That only comes much, much later, when other traditions sort of started leaking into it, latter-day writers. In the original tantras, it's all about basically spiritual technology. Here's what you do to get this result. Go do it and find out. At the same time, it's not dry. It really isn't just like a technology like we would think of, because although we don't want to cultivate just believing in things or having faith in things, the uprising or the upswelling of devotion is something that everybody eventually experiences. Because the entire reality is in a state of amazement, thrill, devotion toward its own essence nature. The self-awareness of reality is looking at itself with amazement, with devotion. Just as I've always said, like an artist looks at their own artwork in that same way. Because when we create something, we bring it out of ourselves and we look at it, we feel amazement that we did that, that's us. You know, anybody who makes art doesn't feel like the art is separate from them. You're looking at something of yourself and you feel amazement. You feel wonder, you feel devotion toward that whole process, that you have that opportunity to do that. So it's the same with all of realities in that state. So when we discover the nature of ourselves, we also discover devotion. It's an extremely devotional tradition. Not in any forced way where there's any specific way that you have to express devotion, but in the sense that the process of self-realization is a process of discovering devotion and coming to express that. No holds barred toward everything. A kind of what the Maharashtrian poet Gyanadeva called natural devotion. Right? That which just arises in the course of sadhana, in the course of this discovery. So there are many, many different traditions, and Nanda Mayama taught very often that every tradition is made out of the same reality, by the same reality, because people need those traditions. But not every tradition has the same goal, and certainly not every tradition has the same view. And I think that the overarching thing that I would like our community to really keep in mind is that anybody can participate here at any level they want to, for any reason they want to, but that what the tradition is actually offering you, if you should choose to really devote your life to this path, is an opportunity to really wake up and completely transform your relationship to being alive. And not every tradition wants that, right? That's not, some people just want to relax. I think if Ma were alive today, she would totally be fine with stuff like acro yoga and all that stuff that's just for fun and exercise, and I don't think she'd have any problem with any of that. Or people doing, what was it I read? I can't remember exactly, but it was in Buddha Dharma magazine. And somebody was talking about a practice that people do in the Buddhist communities, and it has a number in it. It's a number of minutes a day. I think it's something like 20 minutes for 108 days or something like that. It's a thing. I don't really remember. But anyway, this person was describing it and saying, yeah, and if you want to break your 20 minutes up into 2 10-minute segments, that's okay. And I don't think Ma would have any problem with that, right? It would be fine. This tradition is speaking to something that I felt ever since I was a little kid, which is I want to discover my full capacity as a human being. Right? What's really possible here as a human being? What's possible to know? What's possible to discover? Not somebody else's prefab idea of how to be a human being, but actually looking and discovering without any preconceptions. So that's what I think is being offered by this tradition, a possibility to do that. It's only radical in contrast to some other things, but actually it's just completely natural. To me, it's just nature accomplishing itself in a more thoroughgoing way. And I think one of the cool things is that the community is really starting to form a much stronger energy body. And that gives people more possibility to realize. Because it keeps you aligned with that process of waking up. You don't get as many breaks, times to just sort of wander off somewhere. Right? It's recalibrating everybody. Anybody who wants to come along, that is. Jayakula is a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. We are based in Portland, Maine and Portland, Oregon. Visit jayakula.org to explore more of our offerings.